like I think that for a lot of brothers, so many of my boys will have said that like the group chat has saved their lives.
Wow.
Like having a group chat in adulthood, like I wish that I had a group chat or whatever my group chat is, because I can lob something out there in the group chat now at my big age, and somebody's gonna come back with it or hit me on the side or something like that. Yo, you good today?
Right.
And I'm like, I wish that so many other younger guys had some equivalent of that or had the language or mechanism to be able to do that for each other. Because I've seen it happen. Like I used to volunteer at this organization here in New York, and I would see how the guys would just look out for each other.
That's right.
And it was like they automatically now had brothers to look out for them. And it was, I think it was life-changing for them. Right. You know what I'm saying? And for a lot of my friends who didn't have a brother or didn't have that father figure, like the group chat is like where it gets deep a little bit sometimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you can have a group chat that's not productive.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You got a lot of people, you know, I mean, you can have conversations about game and ball and whatnot, but nothing constructive that's going to assist you.
Because you're the presumption is that in a group chat like the one you're talking about, Drew, there are men who are healthy enough and who have the language enough and are comfortable enough using the language to not even just say a thing, but to text it out and to type it out. And I think to your point, Brian, what you're hitting on is that every group chat doesn't have that. And if your group chat is populated with people who are going through pain without that language, brothers who are going through pain without the capacity to articulate it, then it might be a group chat where negative imaging or behaviors are reinforced. So the healing that's happening, and it sounds like, and you push back on this, it sounds as though you're in a group chat with some brothers who are engaged in some individual healing processes that allow that to be reflected in your collective space.
Yeah, or who are already healed from some stuff and like, yo, I'm gonna share you what worked for me.
Who are men, not boys. And I think that's the difference. Because, you know, a man is a giver. We always say in our rites of passage, boy do what he want to do, man does what he has to do. And, you know, I want my kids to think about that all the time, because a boy is a taker. You know, a boy is thinking about what he can get, but a man is a giver. And I think when you get in a group chat with men who are concerned, who are vulnerable, who are comfortable, who have had some life experience, who are in the process of healing, that's very different than a group of toxic brothers passing videos and memes and exchanging toxic masculinity, which, you know, which I think.
Okay, now all y'all did a black men. So y'all know what that is. Dr. Damas, I need to pull your voice in here a bit, because you are somebody who has also seen, I mean, you grew up in Flatbush, Brooklyn. You from this community. You navigated through Brooklyn Tech. You are now a doctor with your own medical practice. And you know, have not escaped tragedy in your own life. Talk to us about how black men poured into you to help you cultivate the Dr. Damas that we all know today.
So I would have to say, you know, just listening to what some of the gentlemen here said, my father was a different type of dude. So, you know, we're immigrants. He's Haitian immigrant, had to flee Haiti from Duvalier's tenure there, his reign, right? So he's really hardcore dude. So it wasn't like a loving household thing. It was like hard, right? And
wait, was it not loving or was it not tender?
It was neither. It was none of that stuff, right? So, you know, but the things that, like, first of all, the things I remember like growing up in Flatbush and going outside to the streets and being like, there's no way y'all gonna mess with me because I live with a terrorist. like, yo, there's nothing you're gonna do out here for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's hard for me at home. Like, out here in the street, you got nothing for me. You know what I'm saying? Because I gotta go back upstairs to that. So I swear to God, you got nothing for me out here, right? So it gave me a kind of hardness that allowed me to move through that, right? But also gave me a lot of this. He didn't never miss the day of work. Right? Bills were always paid, like, you know what I'm saying? So there was some stability in that household outside of, like, you know, the other stuff. And I had 3 older brothers, and those dudes much older than me. So I'm the youngest of 4, and the closest one in age to me is 5 years older than me. And he became a lawyer. So, like, he was the first one to go to college, right? So he was doing that stuff. And my other brothers were, like, you know, the first ones to get a job, to do all this stuff, right? Because we're literally immigrants. So we're just figuring this all out. And so they're putting me on to things. And so kind of navigating that, I realized that there was, like, 2 safe spaces. It was, like, school and the football field, right? Playing sports. And so once I became good at both of them, right, you kind of develop a community. right? And so on the football field, as Brian was talking, like, you got your teammates, you guys are there. I mean, it was hard. We used to practice by Atlantic Terminal. I mean, my teammates got shot. We had beef with dudes from the projects all the time. And so we had no choice. I played football with a bunch of Decepticons. So if you're from that area, you know, if that period of time, you know who the Deceps are. I was never, ever like gonna be a Decep. I was already cool with them, right? So I had like this kind of protected kind of status from the Deceps because I was nice at football, right? And then, you know, I had my coaches who also were like really, 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 really good guides for young men. I think a lot of young men get that experience through sports where you have these male figures through the sport who are like, you know, become father figures and care about you, right? So they're looking out for you. So, you know, my high school coaches, like, really, we're still really tight. I mean, looked out for me. As a matter of fact, you know, one of the biggest things that happened, I had a friend that was a DCEP, played football with me. He was a DCEP, got kicked off the team. Coach was like, yo, if I see you with him again, you're off the team. Wow. And I was like, me? Like, he was, I like it here, though. You know what I'm saying? So, and no lie, you know, he wound up doing a bid. He wound up doing a lot of time. If I was still hanging out with him, if I had not been given that ultimatum, I would have been with him. It's the truth. I would have been with him. And then, you know, as I grew older, I joined the frat. I'm a Q. And I remember being amazed by these men and their ability to do all these things at a high level. And like, you don't have to just be an athlete. You don't have to just be a student. You don't have to just be a tech wizard. You can be artistic. Like, you can be all of you, right? So I remember just like meeting the bros from the first time and being like, wait a minute, like, you're doing this, you're doing all of that. They're like, yeah, like, why not? And I was like, you know what? Where I'm from, it's usually like, yo, you got to do this and get out of the hood. Like, you got to find yourself a path, a job, a government job, take the city exam, and then get out, right? And so now here you guys are talking about, do whatever you want, like, open the top off of this thing and see what you can do. And, you know, that for me was amazing. And those dudes, I just came from a weekend with the bros. I'm 30 years in the frat. Lots of community service things, lots of mentoring, lots of, like, that's been a very fulfilling experience for me. And then finally, I would say, and this is going to sound odd, but I have 2 sons, and, you know, those dudes are teaching me how to be a better man and father all the time, right? And there's something about the way that they're experiencing the world that I didn't experience, right? So they see the world through a different lens, right? They don't have a lot of the trauma. So sometimes I'm talking and they're like, what are you talking about? Oh boy, like,
tell me more about this foreign trauma, Father.
What is this that you got going on, right? And, you know, they've taught me how to communicate better. You know, they pour love into me, which is amazing. Like, you know, these kids will like do little sweet things, like, you know, as boys, and like tell me they love me, hug me. You know, I'm like, I didn't have this experience, right? And so now I'm like figuring out how to raise young men without the trauma, right? Wow. Without the fire under your feet, right? Without all of that stuff, right?
Without being a terrorist.
Without being a terrorist, right? Right? So that they can be strong in themselves and they don't need somebody, you know, to be like rough and rigid with them in order for them to be their best selves. They can still be strong. They can still be sensitive. They can still be in touch with their emotions without it having to be some, you know, really abrasive environment, right, for where it leaves them with scars. And so those 2 little dudes all the time, they'll tell me what's on their mind. And sometimes I'm like, yo, you know, this is bordering on disrespectful. You got a lot of freedom right now, right? But I feel you. I
feel some terror coming on.
I feel like, yo, just but I get what, you know, you feeling yourselves, you're allowed to. Go ahead. It's a safe space.
No terrorism here. No, I love this because one of the things that I think a number of you picked up on or pointed out was this notion that it wasn't just a father. There was a village component to the black men that you had available to you. And you sort of help, I think, for people who are often asking questions like, why do they want to do sports so bad? There's so much more to the world. for each of you who spoke about your athletic experience, there was a fathership relationship there. It wasn't just a coach. It was somebody who was providing, either supplementing what the men in your family were providing for you, or providing for you what those men who through their absence or presence were not able to do so. I also asked Mayor Brandon Scott this question, or a similar question, and I want us to take a listen. This is Mayor Scott of the great city of Baltimore. And we've got some amazing comments coming in from the Zoom as well. I'm going to read some of those. But I want you all to hear as Mayor Brandon Scott describes some of the men who poured into him, and you'll find that there's a lot of resonance there that we're going to pick up on the other side. You've mentioned at this point a variety of family members. I'm struck by the consistent reference to Black men in your life, your father, grandfather, great-grandfather, uncles, and the roles, not just that they were your family members, but that they had specific roles in community that allowed them to be more present for family, which allowed them to be more present for community. Talk to us about the way that the Black men in your family in particular, recognizing that this is not something that only Black men do, but because we're focused today on fathers and the role of fatherhood and the way that Black men connect to each other. Can you give us a sense as to how the Black men in your family poured into you in ways that are directly tied to the type of leadership that you're engaged in now? We've sort of seen what that looked like generally, but if you could give us some examples as to the specific relationship and then the nature of the relationships that went into pouring into you so that you would be prepared for this moment.
Yeah, I think I always tell people, look, my dad is my dad. I love him dearly. But in the way that my family operates, he's really not my only dad, right? My uncles are also like fathers to me, and even my older cousins are like fathers to me, because as I said, after school, it basically for me was whichever one of them was free enough for me to go, or I would go to the shop, and if another one that was there and they were going somewhere and I wanted to go, they would take me, and we all grew up so close together, with the exception of one of my uncles who lived in East Baltimore. We all lived in Northwest Baltimore. I could walk to all of their houses within 4 or 5 minutes, right? So when you come from that kind of family, and it's just so many instances, like my parents, my dad and my mom would tell you that I act more like my oldest uncle than any person on this planet, partly because I spent so much time with him, right? And there's so many instances and things pieces I take from all of them. Like my dad has he won't let you know it, but he has this huge heart. And I always tell people, I realized it later in life, right? And for me, I ran track from the time I was 6 years old until I was 18. But I learned many lessons from both my parents, but my dad. Like my dad never saw me run, ever. And it wasn't because he didn't want to, but my dad and then my mom later, they coached my little league at my brother's schools so that all the kids in our neighborhood actually had a team. So the sacrifice that they had to make, he had to make, and my mom later on, was that, hey, we won't be able to come see you because we have to do this for the greater good. And that's where I learned, right? Even living next to a vacant house and next to some of my neighbors who didn't have the wherewithal, I had to start cutting the grass, which is back then the yard was huge when you're 6, 7 years old, right? It's small to me now. I could cut it in 10 minutes. But like, not only did I have to cut the grass at my house, I had to cut the grass at the vacant house and my neighbors' houses who couldn't physically cut their grass. And when I asked my dad why, he said, well, when people drive down this hill, they're not going to look and see, they're like, oh, this one house looks great. Look at their yard. They can be like, none of those people care because of how it looks. And it would say that you have this higher responsibility. And then I would grow up to understand like why so many kids were always at our house. So many of our friends, right? So many of my friends, so many of my brother's friends, so many of my cousin's friends, right? Because I would later learn that the situations that they were living in, and this spirit of doing was the greater good and doing things for others that people that it might cause you to deal with a little less. I learned that directly from my dad and one of my uncles in particular. And I'll get to the other ones, but I'll never forget this. My cousin and I, we had this thing. We would go to my grandmother's. My mom's mom moved to Baltimore, obviously, when my mom moved here as a kid, and we would start our Christmas there, right? And they had this rule that me and my cousin couldn't have the same video games because we were going to be with each other all the time, all of these things. And it's the year that Sega Genesis like really, really went crazy. And everyone also had like the starter jackets. Like everyone had the starter Hornets jacket, or the Suns jacket was a secondary one. And video games like Sonic the Hedgehog, etc. And we would always get footballs. And that Christmas morning, we had my grandmother's. We go outside, we're playing with the football. One of our friends comes out and he's crying. He's like crying. And we're like, what's wrong? He tells us that like his mother, who we now know was struggling with addiction, sold all of his stuff on Christmas Eve. So we tell our parents that, and then my dad pulls me and my cousin aside and said, hey, y'all gonna have to give some of your stuff to him. So like I had to give up a coat and a Sonic the Hedgehog game, which was like the thing that I wanted the most. My cousin had to give up a football, right? Yeah. But that's a life lesson that I learned about like helping people when they're at their worst. And I didn't know then how much that would impact me growing up, but it did. And then just seeing him, and then my older cousin, who's also like an uncle to me, who runs the air conditioning heating business. I worked there legally since I was from 14 to 22. Don't tell them they made me work before that, but they did. But I noticed that so many of the people that work with me, right? Because basically everybody that worked for that company, that worked in the field, that didn't have the last name Scott, all had something in common. They were young black men who had some issues in the past, who got into a program or something and was learning how to do HVAC. That's basically all they hired.
He goes on to talk there. Now, again, was Mayor Brandon Scott from the great state of Maryland and the city of Baltimore. And he goes on to talk about the fact that his family members who had the capacity to provide for themselves then used their position to open up doorways for everybody else who's coming through. And as you hear him say, if your last name wasn't Scott, you were somebody who were there because you had gone through some things, and this was a safe place and a refuge. And I'm struck that one of the through lines through the conversation that we've had thus far has been in complete defiance of the stereotypes of what we are often taught about Black men. Providers, caregivers, love examples, right? Educators, someone who showed how to care for community, not just your own within it, but the community at large. And so we're going to pause here for now. We're going to get ready to go to commercial break. Although I do want to share with you all the chat. Shout out to everybody in the chat. If y'all could just wave to everybody in the webinar, in the chat, because there's been some great comments. Dr. Damas, they say you speaking the truth. I often say my son is doing a great job raising me, and this generation is different. We got some great questions we're going to get to on the other side as well. Brian, someone says, you are right. Having that historical understanding of the root cause of our issues helps to understand the leaves and the tree. Someone else said, Naim Akbar speaks to the transformation of a man. So we're seeing a lot of what you all say resonate with the experiences of the folks who are in the chat. And we're going to pull some of the questions that you all provided, some really good questions as well, into the next conversation.